When Dutch colonists landed at the southern tip of Africa over 300 years ago, they encountered an indigenous people known as the Kiosean. The Kiosean are the Native Americans of South Africa, a lost tribe of Bushmen, nomadic hunter-gatherers, distinct from the darker Bantu-speaking people who later migrated south to become the Zulu, Xhosa, and Sotho tribes of modern South Africa. While settling in Cape Town and the surrounding frontier, the white colonists had their way with the Kiosean women, and the first mixed people of South Africa were born. To work the colonists' farms, slaves were soon imported from different corners of the Dutch Empire, from West Africa, Madagascar, and the East Indies. The slaves and the Kiosean intermarried, and the white colonists continued to dip in and take their liberties. And over time, the Kiosean all but disappeared from South Africa. While most were killed off through disease, famine, and war, the rest of their bloodline was bred out of existence, mixed in with the descendants of whites and slaves to form an entirely new race of people, coloreds. Colored people are a hybrid, a complete mixture. Some are light and some are dark. Some have Asian features, some have white features, some have black features. It's not uncommon for a colored man and a colored woman to have a child that looks nothing like either parent. The curse that colored people carry is having no clearly defined heritage to go back to. If they trace their lineage back far enough, at a certain point, it splits into white and native and a tangled web of other. Since their native mothers are gone, their strongest affinity has always been with their white fathers, the Afrikaners. Most colored people don't speak African languages. They speak Afrikaans. Their religion, their institutions, all of the things that shape their culture came from the Afrikaners. The history of colored people in South Africa is, in this respect, worse than the history of Black people in South Africa. For all that Black people have suffered, they know who they are. Colored people don't. Part 2, Chapter 9, The Mulberry Tree. At the end of our street in Eden Park, right in a bend at the top of the road, stood a giant mulberry tree growing out of someone's front yard. Every year, when it bore fruit, the neighborhood kids would go and pick berries from it, eating as many as they could and filling up bags to take home. They would play under the tree together. I had to play under the tree by myself. I didn't have any friends in Eden Park. I was the anomaly wherever we lived. In Hillsborough, we lived in a white area and nobody looked like me. In Soweto, we lived in a black area and nobody looked like me. In Eden Park, though it was a colored area, Eden Park, everyone looked like me, but we couldn't have been more different. It was the biggest mind bender I have ever experienced. The animosity I felt from the colored people I encountered growing up was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. It taught me that it is easier to be an insider as an outsider than to be an outsider as an insider. If a white guy chooses to immerse himself in hip-hop culture and only hang out with black people will say, "Cool, white guy, do what you need to do." If a black guy chooses to button up his blackness to live among white people and play lots of golf, white people will say, "Fine, I like Brian. He's safe." But try being a black person who immerses himself in white culture while still living in the black community. Try being a white person who adopts the trappings of black culture while still living in the white community. You will face more hate and ridicule and ostracism than you can even begin to fathom. People are willing to accept you if they see you as an outsider trying to assimilate into their world. But when they see you as a fellow tribe member attempting to disavow the tribe, that is something they will never forgive. That is what happened to me in Eden Park. I was mixed but not colored. Colored by complexion but not by culture. Because of that, I was seen as a colored person who didn't want to be colored. In Eden Park, I encountered two types of colored people. Some colored people hated me because of my blackness. My hair was curly and I was proud of my afro. I spoke African languages and loved speaking them. People would hear me speaking in Xhosa or Zulu and they'd say, "What's your J? In Bosman? What are you, a Bushman? Why are you trying to be black? Why do you speak that click-clack language? Look at your light skin. You're almost white, and you're throwing it away." Other colored people hated me because of my whiteness. Even though I identified as being black, I had a white father. I went to an English private school. I'd learned to get along with white people at church. I could speak perfect English, and I barely spoke Afrikaans, the language colored people were supposed to speak. So colored people thought I was better than them. Even when I thought I was liked, I wasn't. One year, I got a brand new bike during the summer holidays. My cousin Mungalisi and I were taking turns riding around the block. I was riding up our street when this cute colored girl came out to the road and stopped me. She smiled and waved to me sweetly. Hey, she said, can I ride your bike? I was completely shocked. Oh, wow, I thought, I made a friend. Yeah, of course, I said. I got off and she got on and rode about 20 or 30 feet. Some random older kid came running up to the street. She stopped and got off and he climbed on and rode away. I was so happy that a girl had spoken to me. I ran back home, smiling and skipping along. My cousin asked where the bicycle was and I told him, Trevor, you've been robbed, he said. Why didn't you chase them? I thought they were being nice. I thought I'd made a friend. Mungalisi was older, my protector. He ran off and found the kids, and 30 minutes later, he came back with my bike. Things like that happened a lot. I was bullied all the time. The incident at the Mulberry Tree was probably the worst of them. Late one afternoon, I was playing by myself, like I always did, running around the neighborhood. This group of 5 or 6 colored boys was up the street picking berries off the mulberry tree and eating them. I went over and started picking some to take home for myself. The boys were a few years older than me, around 12 or 13. They didn't talk to me, and I didn't talk to them. They were speaking to one another in Afrikaans, and I could understand what they were saying. Then one of them, the kid who was the ringleader of the group, walked over. Majikia jo maribisin. Can I see your mulberries? My first thought again was, oh, cool, I made a friend. I held up my hand and showed him my mulberries. Then he knocked them out of my hand and smushed them into the ground. The other kids started laughing. I stood there and looked at him a moment. But by that point, I developed thick skin. I was used to being bullied. I shrugged it off and went back to picking berries. Clearly not getting the reaction he wanted, this kid started cursing me out. I ignored him and went on about my business. Then I felt a splat on the back of my head. He'd hit me with a mulberry. It wasn't painful, just startling. I turned to look at him and splat. He hit me again, right in my face. Then in a split second, before I could even react, all of these kids started pelting me with berries. Some of the berries weren't ripe and stung like rocks. I tried to cover my face with my hands, but there was a barrage coming at me from all sides. The kids were laughing and pelting me and calling me names. Bushy, Bushman! I was terrified. Just the suddenness of it. I didn't know what to do. I started crying and I ran. I ran for my life all the way back down the road to our house. When I ran inside, my mother looked at me horrified. What happened? Between sobs, I told her the story. When I finished, she burst out laughing. It's not funny, I said. No, Trevor, she said. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing out of relief. I thought you'd been beaten up. I thought you were covered in blood. I'm laughing because it's only berry juice. Look on the bright side. She pointed to the half of me covered in dark berry juice. Now you really are half black and half white. It's not funny. Trevor, you're okay, she said. Go and wash up. You're not hurt. You're hurt emotionally, but you're not hurt. Half an hour later, Abel showed up. At that point, Abel was still my mom's boyfriend. He wasn't trying to be my father or even a stepfather. He was more like a big brother than anything. I didn't know him that well, but one thing I did know was that he had a temper. Very charming when he wanted to be, incredibly funny, but he could be mean. He'd grown up in the homelands where you had to fight to survive. Abel was big, too, around 6'3", long and lean. I knew he was dangerous. I'd seen it. Someone would cut us off in traffic, and Abel would yell out the window. The other guy would honk and yell back, and in a flash, Abel would be out of the car, over to theirs, grabbing the guy through the driver's side window, screaming in his face, raising a fist. You'd see the other guy panic. When Abel walked in that night, he sat down on the couch and saw that I had been crying. What happened, he said. I started to explain. My mother cut me off. Don't tell him, she said. She knew what would happen. She knew better than me. Don't tell me what, said Abel. It's nothing, she said. It's not nothing, I said. She glared at me. Don't tell him. Abel was getting frustrated. What? Don't tell me what? He had been drinking. He never came home from work sober, and the drinking always made his temper worse. It was strange, but in that moment I realized that if I said the right things, I could get him to step in and do something. We were almost family, and I knew if I made him feel like his family had been insulted, he'd help me get back at the boys. I told him the story, the names they called me, the way they attacked me. My mother kept laughing it off, telling me to get over it, that it was kids being kids, no big deal. She was just trying to diffuse the situation, but I couldn't see that. I was just mad at her. Abel wasn't laughing. As I told him what the bullies had done, I could see the anger building up inside him. With Abel's anger, there was no ranting and raving, no clenched fist. He sat there on the couch listening to me, not saying a word. Then, very calm and deliberate, he stood up. "Take me to these boys," he said. Yes, I thought, this is it. Big Brother is going to get my revenge for me. We got into his car and drove up the road, stopping a few houses down from the tree. It was dark now, except for the light from the street lamps, but we could see the boys were still there playing under the tree. I pointed to the ringleader, that one. He was the main one. Abel slammed his foot on the gas and shot up onto the grass, straight toward the bottom of the tree. He jumped out. I jumped out. As soon as the kids saw me, they knew exactly what was happening. They scattered and ran like crazy. Abel was quick. He was fast. The ringleader had made a dash for it and was trying to climb over a wall. Abel grabbed him, pulled him down hard, and dragged him back. Then he snapped off a branch of the tree, a switch, and started whipping him. I loved it. Revenge truly is sweet. Then I caught a glimpse of the look of terror in the boy's face, and I realized that Abel had gone past getting revenge for me. He wasn't doing this to teach the kid a lesson. He was just beating him. He was a grown man venting his rage on a 12-year-old boy. In an instant, I went from, yes, I got my revenge, to, dear God, what have I done? Once the kid went limp, Abel dragged him over to the car and held him up in front of me. Say you're sorry. The kid was whimpering, trembling. He looked me in the eye, and I had never seen fear in someone's eyes like I saw in his. He'd been beaten by a stranger in a way I don't think he'd ever been beaten before. He said he was sorry, but it was like his apology wasn't for what he'd done to me. It was like he was sorry for every bad thing he'd ever done in his life because he didn't know there could be a punishment like this. Looking in that boy's eyes, I realized how much he and I had in common. He was a kid. I was a kid. He was crying. I was crying. He was a colored boy in South Africa taught how to hate and how to hate himself, who had bullied him that he needed to bully me. He'd made me feel fear, and to get my revenge, I unleashed my fury on his world. I'd done a terrible thing. Once the kid apologized, Abel shoved him away and kicked him. The kid ran off, and we drove back to the house in silence. At home, Abel and my mom got in a huge fight. She was always on him about his temper. You can't go around hitting other people's children. You're not the law. This anger is no way to live. A couple of hours later, this kid's dad drove over to our house to confront Abel. Abel went out to the gate, and I watched from inside the house. By that point, Abel was truly drunk. This kid's dad had no idea what he was walking into. He was some mild-mannered, middle-aged guy. I don't remember much about him because I was watching Abel the whole time. I never took my eyes off him. I knew that was where the danger was. Abel didn't have a gun yet. He bought that later. But Abel didn't need a gun to put the fear of God into you. I watched as he got right in this guy's face. I couldn't hear what the other man was saying, but I heard Abel. Don't mess with me. I'll kill you. The guy turned quickly away.